he had this weird experience breeding his dogs. And so Swinho took the letter back to Darwin and said, hey, look at this, it's pretty cool. And then Darwin's written all over it and, gotten back in touch, kind of asking, hey, what is that about crossbreeding? Why do they look that way?
That's just amazing, Rachel. Hey, really nice to have you on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
There you go, Rachel, who has authentic correspondence between an ancestor and Charles Darwin about breeding dogs. It's quite the story, Liam. Anything from you?
Yeah, it's quite a well-known thing that Charles Darwin was this huge dog lover, and dogs played this big part in his thinking, and his ideas on all mammals having all species having a common ancestor. And there's actually, I read a while ago, a really good book. It's called Darwin's Dogs, and it's about how his love of dogs, fed into this into his theory of evolution. So amazing to have an actual example. There we go, authenticated. Who knows? Maybe even that correspondence is footnoted in the book somewhere.
Yes, and on the panel for Show and Tell, Lavina, Liam, you've been fantastic. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45, and Lisa Owen with Checkpoint is next. Stay tuned.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, lots of people have lost money, some have lost their jobs, no one is happy. A former Supie director who resigned days before it went under speaks out. The company managing Whakaari White Island is convicted over failings in the lead up to the fatal eruption. Should some dog breeds be completely banned after recent attacks? More than 3,000 children have died in attacks on Gaza, and the list of dead aid workers grows too. We cross to a Kiwi still working there, and we check in on the plight of hungry baby penguins in the Hauraki Gulf. Don't forget, you can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The company that owns Whakaari White Island has been convicted of a health and safety failing before the eruption 4 years ago that killed 22 people and injured 25. In the culmination of an Auckland trial that began in July, Judge Evangelos Thomas today dismissed one other charge laid by WorkSafe, but found that Whakaari management did not meet its responsibilities as a workplace. Before announcing his decision, he paid tribute to the victims.
Families and communities in New Zealand and around the world were and continue to be deeply affected. I pay special tribute to the survivors who gave evidence during this trial.
Whakaari management will be sentenced alongside 6 other guilty parties in February and could be fined up to $1.5 million. The number of patients waiting more than 4 months to see a specialist has jumped by 46% in a year. Data just released by Te Whatu Ora shows that in June, 51,000 people had been waiting that long, compared with 35,000 at the same time the previous year. Preventable hospital admissions for babies and preschoolers also shot up by 35%, particularly in Auckland and mainly for Pacifica, for whom the rate was 45%. Te Whatu Ora's interim chief clinician officer, Richard Sullivan, says the health system is still feeling the ripple effects of COVID-19. A former Armed Offenders Squad officer says he was frustrated by delays in getting paramedics into Al Noor Mosque during the Christchurch terror attack. The inquest has heard today from the man who led the first team into the mosque. The former officer, who has name suppression, says his team gave victims what first aid they could. He says he called at 1:59 p.m. for ambulances to come to the mosque.
Fair to say I was quite overwhelmed with the amount of injured and dying and deceased, and I suppose it became a bit of a focus getting them forward for me at that stage, and you get a bit of frustration that it's not happening.
The officer says he repeated the call 2 minutes later and expressed his frustration that it still hadn't happened at 2:05. The Thames Coromandel District Council has voted unanimously to introduce Māori Wards. Rowan Quinn reports.
The decision made at a council meeting today ensures there'll be at least one Māori ward in time for the next local government elections in 2025. There'll now be a review to determine how many wards are needed and what their boundaries will be. That process will include public consultation. A council spokesperson says about 12 members of the public spoke at today's meeting in support of the wards before councillors voted.
A Far North man who says he almost bled to death after a dog attack is still having nightmares and struggling to walk a year later. While walking near his Awanui home, Chris Radich was mauled by a dog that got off its lead. Now he's organising a petition which has so far gathered more than 600 signatures, calling on the Far North District Council to take a harder line on irresponsible owners.
Things have got to change. It's so bad up here, you know. Nighttime, I can still see that dog's face on me, you know. Every time a dog comes to me, I just shake. I've had enough, and this has got to stop.
Chris Radich says he felt compelled to take action after 2 fatal dog attacks in the Far North since August last year. Rain is easing on the east coast, but weather warnings remain. Met Service has warned of heavy rain for inland Gisborne until 9 o'clock tonight, with a further 90 millimetres expected. Tairāwhiti Civil Defence says the rain is easing, but there is some flooding across the region. In Hawke's Bay, an earlier weather warning has been downgraded to a watch, but heavy showers and thunderstorms are still expected inland south of State Highway 5 this evening. To sport now, and Rugby Australia could be chasing outgoing All Blacks coach Ian Foster as the next Wallabies coach. Eddie Jones quit less than a year into a 5-year contract after a calamitous Rugby World Cup campaign. Rugby Australia Chief Executive Phil Waugh says they want to take time to make the right choice, and Foster could be a contender. Jones has reportedly been looking to return to the Japan head coaching role. Meanwhile, the South Africa government has declared a public holiday on December the 15th to celebrate the Springboks World Cup win. Argentina football captain Lionel Messi has won a record extending 8th Ballon d'Or for the best player in the world. He headed off Norway's UEFA Player of the Year and treble winner Erling Haaland of Manchester City. Now with Inter Miami, Messi, who last won the award in 2021, played a pivotal role in guiding Argentina to their first World Cup title in 36 years when they beat France in the final last year. Spain and Barcelona midfielder Aitana Bonmati was named Women's Player of the Year. Manchester City were named Men's Club of the Year and Barcelona the Women's Club. And the English Ice Hockey Association now says it will make the wearing of neck guards mandatory. Nottingham Panthers forward Adam Johnson died after suffering a serious cut to his neck from a skate during a game at the weekend. And that's the news.
More disturbing developments in Gaza.
So many eyes are on that video. 3 women in a room. One of the women speaks very powerfully.
An online supermarket goes out of business.
Supie was pretty brave entering this market. They put a lot on the line to do what they did.
Gearing up for Halloween.
Ghost.
Why did you want to be a ghost?
Because I love them.
We'll come knocking. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and the Central High Country. Rain or showers, possibly heavy, clearing from Northland, Auckland and areas near the west coast tomorrow. However, thunderstorms and possible downpours elsewhere tomorrow afternoon and evening. The remainder of the North Island, partly cloudy. Isolated showers in the afternoons and evenings, possibly thundery about northern Whanganui and Manawatu, also tomorrow about Wairarapa. Nelson, Marlborough and Bulla mainly fine, however isolated afternoon and evening showers inland with thunderstorms possible today. Low cloud or fog about the Kaikoura coast. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine apart from fog and low cloud near the coast, and isolated afternoon and evening showers for inland Canterbury with thunderstorms possible. Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, however patchy light rain about Fiordland tomorrow, spreading to Westland at night. And for the Chatham Islands, rain developing this evening. RNZ National, it is 5:07 and you're with Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi ana, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A former director of failed online grocer Supie, who resigned just days before it went under, won't say when he knew the company was in trouble. Voluntary administrators have been brought in after a key investor pulled the pin, with Supie owing about $3 million to creditors. 120 staff instantly lost their jobs and are unlikely to be paid their owed wages. Founder Sarah Ball launched the Auckland-based independent virtual supermarket in 2021 in competition with the two big chains. The company had 3 directors up until last Friday, when 2 bailed out just before the company's financial predicament was made public. Former director Ben Keeps says the company acted as soon as it knew it was in trouble.
It's disappointing for everyone. Sarah Ball put her absolute heart and soul and 3 or 4 years' work into this business, and frankly has done better providing competition in the grocery sector than anyone else has done before. So from that perspective, it's really sad for her. It's sad for staff. It's sad for investors, and it's sad for New Zealand because Supie was providing some much needed competition that sadly isn't going to be there anymore.
I know it's early days, but what do you think went wrong?
So, I mean, Tex Edwards, the sort of competition guru, has commented at length about how broken the grocery sector is in New Zealand. There's a duopoly, there's fear from suppliers around supplying others. Our capital markets are difficult because of the duopoly situation. There's not a lot of people that really want to put a lot of money into backing alternative competitors. There's just a bunch of stuff that made it really difficult. But the context, I guess, is that startups are difficult and startups do fail, and it's sad and unfortunate, but this is a part of having a vibrant ecosystem.
Supie did pretty well in capital raises over the last 24 months, about 10 million, I think it was. I mean, what did that go into?
That went to building a technology platform, to building a brand, to obviously, getting sales out there, marketing, building a team. There's a lot involved. There's a lot involved in any startup. There's even more involved when it's a startup that deals with inventory and product and hard goods and shipping stuff around the country. So, that's what we did.
Do you stand by decisions made on where that money went? Do you think it was spent in the right places?
Every founder, executive or board member from a startup will say that every day they make mistakes, and every day they try and learn from those mistakes and do better. Overall, I think we did a good job getting where we got. It's tragic that we didn't see success at the end of it, and obviously some of that comes down to some decisions that we made, and some of it comes down to external factors.
When did you realise things weren't going well?
So there's a bunch of stuff that will come out through the administration process, and I'm obviously not at liberty to comment. So
there's about $3 million owed to different people. That doesn't happen overnight, does it? Takes time to build up that level.
No, we were. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of different things in there. There's wages, obviously, which is a real shame. There's leases. There's stock. All those sorts of things. We were in the middle of a fundraise, and we had been really successful with that fundraise, and then ultimately that turned out not to be the case, and that's why the situation ended up where it was.
Did you capital raise to pay bills?
Any startup capital raises to buy stock, to build product, to market, to get in the market and deliver. That's what any startup does. So that's why you capital raise.
But you can't say when you started to realise things were not going to work out. Was it days or weeks or months?
We had a board of directors. That board of directors were well aware of its obligations, and at all times we complied with those obligations. And that for those that are commercial lawyers, that will tell them that exactly what we did and didn't do.
So Ben, are you saying that you never ever continued to trade while you were insolvent?
The way these things work is as soon as directors have an obligation, as soon as they realise that things aren't working, they have an obligation to take action, and that's what happened.
Right. So, on what day did you take action?
I'm not going to litigate, go through a timeline of exactly when things happened, but suffice it to say that the administrators were called in on the weekend, and they made their announcement on Monday, and it's in their hands now.
Right, because you obviously removed yourself as a director. When exactly did you do that?
So the way that these things work, there were 3 directors, and we were spread around the country. Once it was obvious that administration was the course to take, the reality of that is that you actually need people to be able to sign pieces of paper physically, be on the ground, meet with administrators, go through documentation and those sorts of things. So in order to give the founder and CE the ability to move at pace and to do that stuff without needing, without having us in Auckland, that's why we stood down.
Prior to the weekend, there was not one signal, not one warning bell, not one alarm that went off that things were not going as they should be.
It was prior to the weekend because it was, we had a board meeting on Friday. But as soon as we were aware of the situation we were in, and a lot of it relates to the capital raise that I'm unfortunately not at liberty to discuss. But as soon as we were aware of that, we took action.
So the 120 people who have lost their jobs and were completely blindsided by that, and saying they're not going to get their wages, they're not going to get holiday pay that they are owed. Could you please speak to them now? What is your message?
So, in terms of what they're owed, that's with the administrators, and I don't have any visibility over that. But
do you have any sympathy though, Ben?
No,
if not visibility.
Yeah. So absolutely, the most important thing is a humanistic one. So outside of the legalities and those sorts of things, this is tragic for everyone. Lots of people have lost money. Some people have lost their jobs. Some people, maybe put orders in and aren't going to get their stuff. This is not, no one is happy about this. No one has profited from this. And so I have, no end of sympathy for those people as a human being.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I suppose they are literally and figuratively at the bottom of the food chain, Ben. Is there any chance that they will get any money?
Well, they aren't actually at the bottom of the food chain. There's a lot of other people who are far further down on the food chain than they are, myself included. But I have zero visibility around the administration process, so that's a question for PwC.
And that's former Supie Director Ben Keeps there. Interested in your thoughts on that? 2101 on text, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. 16 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's been almost 4 years since the deadly Whakaari White Island eruption. Now the island's owners, the Buttles, through their company, are being held accountable for health and safety failings. Whakaari management has been found guilty of one charge relating to their duty to ensure tourists and guides visiting the volcanic island were not put at risk of death or serious injury. Amy Williams has been in court.
December 9, 2019 is a day of tragedy, etched in New Zealand history. At that time, Whakaari was a popular tourist attraction. 47 people, most overseas tourists, were on the island when the volcano erupted. Then Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern fronted media the next day.
Yesterday at 2:11 p.m, Whakaari White Island erupted. There were 2 explosions, one after the other in quick succession.
The eruption killed 22 people and injured 25 others, many with severe burns requiring months of treatment. WorkSafe initially charged 13 individuals and organisations in 2020, and the trial began in July after a series of last-minute guilty pleas from 3 helicopter companies and White Island tours. In total, 6 parties pleaded guilty and 6 had charges dismissed, leaving the island's landlord and owner, Whakaari Management, to face charges. Delivering the decision today, Judge Thomas paid tribute to survivors and those who had lost loved ones.
Families and communities in New Zealand and around the world were and continue to be deeply affected. I pay special tribute to the survivors who gave evidence during this trial.
The trial focused on Whakaari Management's failure to assess the risk of taking tourists to Whakaari, exposing them to risk of an eruption which cannot be predicted.
It was fundamental that it engaged the necessary expertise to assess risk arising from the conduct of commercial tours on its active volcano. This was critical to ensuring that tours could be conducted safely.
Judge Thomas told the court that Whakaari Management did not take expert advice from the outset and so failed its duty. He says had the company fully assessed the risk, it would have had 2 options.
It would have fully understood the risk. It would then have had 2 options. A, stop tours entirely. The failure to do so exposed any individual to a risk of death or serious injury. And B, implement effective controls if that were possible.
During the lengthy trial, experts, witnesses and survivors have given evidence. The court heard the harrowing testimony of survivor Jessie Langford in a replayed interview with WorkSafe.
My hands were already pretty much degloved. I was wearing gloves that were just looked like skin. Like the skin was just hanging off from every part of my body that I could see, in between being covered in black ash and stuff.
Jessie Langford was the only member of his family to survive the eruption.
On the page, we were only told about that it's like a sunny walk along one of New Zealand's most active volcanoes. There was no mention of any dangers or anything negative that could hint to a person that the trip could be dangerous.
Whakaari Management will be sentenced in February alongside 6 other parties that pleaded guilty.
Amy Williams with that report. Calls are growing in the far north for tougher action against roaming dogs and irresponsible owners after 2 fatal dog attacks in little more than a year. Some Northlanders are even calling for restrictions on the breeds most often implicated. Peter de Graaf reports.
It's a sound that still sends a chill down Chris Radich's spine, a year after he almost bled to death in a dog attack just around the corner from his Awanui home. The 77-year-old had already told the owner about his concerns.
I said to him, "Cuz, I'm frightened of that dog. That dog was tied up day after day. If it gets off the leash, it'll be dangerous." I was walking with my dog and it was off the leash. It just knocked me on the ground. It was on top of me. I was holding him like this. He was going for my throat.
Luckily, Mr. Radich was able to hold the dog away from his throat. A man working nearby rescued Mr. Radich's pet, then used a spade to fend off the other dog.
We just ripped my leg to smithereens. The blood I lost, that we had the police, we had the fire brigade, we had the ambulance. Even the farmer come with a gun to shoot the dog. That's how dangerous that dog was.
A year on, Mr. Radich's leg is still bandaged and he still struggles to walk. Now he's calling on the Far North District Council to beef up its dog control bylaw and to make sure irresponsible owners are prosecuted. So far, his petition has gathered more than 600 signatures.
It's not the dog's fault. You get these fellas that got dogs tied up day after day after day. And when they let go, they go crazy, man. If it was a kid, goner. Look at all the dog attacks. And what happens? We just go on and nothing gets done.
Also calling for change is Wally Hicks, a former ambulance officer from North Hokianga who put his case at a recent council meeting.
I live in an area where a fatal dog attack occurred about 18 months ago, and I just don't want it to happen to anybody else. And I also was a volunteer ambulance officer for 20 years, and I attended a particularly bad dog attack.
Mr. Hicks says that attack left a child with severe facial wounds. Family members were also badly injured in a crash as they raced the child to hospital. Bad owners or bad breeds usually cop the blame for dog attacks, but Mr. Hicks says both need to be addressed. He's calling for a nationwide sinking lid on breeds overrepresented in serious attacks. People with those breeds could keep their existing pets, but wouldn't be able to replace them with the same type.
We breed these dogs back out of the population and restrict them again as they were before 1987, and also go hard on good ownership.
Leonie Excel of dog advocacy group Bay of Islands Watchdogs believes 3 things are needed in any community that wants to safely manage its dogs.
And the first is that as many people as possible need to get their dogs de-sexed. The second is there needs to be very effective community education where everybody is taught not only how to treat a dog properly, but also how to be wary of what can go wrong. The third arm to that is effective animal control.
Ms. Excel says breed-specific regulations have failed whenever they've been tried in other countries, but she agrees the far north needs better animal control.
This has been failing for a long time, decades now. Having effective animal control where people who continue to let their dogs wander or continue to have dogs which act dangerously, that is critical. We need to follow up on people who are repeat offenders and make sure that they don't keep having dogs that put other people in danger.
Whatever happens, Chris Radich just hopes a solution comes soon.
Things have got to change. It's so bad up here, Nighttime, I can still see that dog's face on me, Every time a dog comes to me, I just shake. I've had enough, and this has got to stop.
23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that story from Peter de Graaf and dangerous dog attacks. Should there be a sinking lid on breeds that are most commonly associated with those attacks, or is it about the owners? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines now. Anna is standing by. Ko Anna Anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. One of the 3 former directors of the failed online grocer Supie, which collapsed yesterday with debts of $3 million, has told Checkpoint the company acted as soon as it knew it was in trouble. Ben Keep resigned days before Supie went under with the loss of 120 jobs. Almost 4 years after the Whakaari White Island eruption killed 22 people and injured 25, the company that owns the volcanic site has been convicted of a single health and safety charge. Judge Evangelos Thomas found Whakaari management failed to meet its responsibilities as a workplace, but dismissed a second WorkSafe charge. Whakaari management and 6 other guilty parties will be sentenced in February. A former Armed Offender Squad officer has told the Christchurch terror inquest of his frustration at delays in getting paramedics into the Al Noor Mosque during the March 15, 2019 attack. The former officer says he called for ambulances at 1:59 p.m, repeated the call 2 minutes later, and was frustrated that they still had not arrived at 2:05. More than 600 people are backing a Far North dog attack survivors petition for the District Council to take a harder line on irresponsible owners. Chris Radich, who's 77, says he nearly bled to death in last year's attack near his Awanui home. And finally, December the 15th will be a public holiday in South Africa as the country marks Sunday's Springboks Rugby World Cup win over the All Blacks in Paris. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says the 12-11 victory has helped to unite the population. And those are the headlines. Lisa, not so much here, hey?
Not so much. I mean, do we get a day off for being first losers home? Yeah. Okay. In a messy exit, Eddie Jones has officially quit as Wallabies coach less than a year into a 5-year deal. He'll leave the job next month after the Wallabies failed to make the knockout stages of the World Cup. This afternoon, Rugby Australia fronted up to questions about what went wrong and what happens next. Well, we're joined by our sports reporter Felicity Reid. Okay, instead of a debate about public holidays. What has Rugby Australia CEO Phil Waugh had to say about this?
Well, the most interesting part from a New Zealand perspective is that he hasn't ruled out chasing outgoing All Blacks coach Ian Foster as the next Wallabies coach. So he wouldn't be the first New Zealander to take on that role. Dave Rennie was in that job before Eddie Jones' very brief second stint with the Wallabies. And speaking today, there was one journalist in Sydney who was quite keen, I think, in trying to find out what Phil Waugh really did think of Ian Foster. He peppered him with quite a few questions about this as he was fronting to speak about the coaching of Eddie Jones's exit and what was happening next with Rugby Australia. And as they went through this, Phil Waugh was saying that they wouldn't be rushing into finding their next candidate. Maybe they'd done that in the past and that they wanted to actually take the time to find the right candidate. He was very measured in his response about Foster and said top coaches around the world would want the job because it involves a Lions tour as well as a home World Cup in 2027. But he did acknowledge that he liked what Foster had done with the All Blacks and getting them to the World Cup final. And that was a final, he said, that could have gone either way. But when going back to the coaching there as well, he talked about that Australia have changed direction and that Eddie Jones has gone in his own direction. But part of that as well, he'd hit back because one of Jones's parting shots was that Rugby Australia had no direction. So he was really disagreeing with this, and he was fronting up today as part of a review and a bit of forward-looking, but Phil Waugh has very usefully wrapped up where Rugby Australia is at.
In summary, disappointing result. In regards to Eddie, I think we've come to a sensible conclusion, both for Eddie and for Rugby Australia. We have a plan. We announced a plan in August, and we'll continue on that path to execute that plan. Financially, we're in a challenged position, but we do have a path forward on the finances. And most importantly, as a game, we need to come together and unite.
And on that financial situation, they have turned down a private equity, which is something that the All Blacks and New Zealand Rugby have opted to do. So they're taking a different path on that. And they're saying that they need to reset the high-performance environment and need to be winning between World Cups.
Let's talk about FIFA. It's handed down further sanctions to the disgraced former president of the Spanish Football Federation. That is over the kiss. Yeah.
Yes, so Luis Rubiales has been banned from all national and international football activities for 3 years. That's part of the FIFA disciplinary committee coming down on that. That originally stood him down for 90 days as they investigated that kiss, the non-consensual kiss with the Spain player Jenny Hermoso after the Football World Cup final. Spain had won, and then that was part of the trophy celebrations that incident took place. And so the FIFA investigated under charges relating to basic rules of decent conduct and behaving in a way that brings the sport into disrepute. So the investigation found that it had breached Article 13 of the Disciplinary Code, which deals with offensive behaviour and violations of the principles of fair play. So as with all of these sanctions, he does have the right to appeal it, and he's gone onto social media today and saying that he will appeal it. He said that this would be so that the justice is served and the truth shines. As part of being sanctioned under this, he will not actually be in any future, should he overturn it or anything like that, in future he would not be able to run to be the president again of the Spanish Football Association. Part of the National Sports Council in Spain does rule out anybody who has been sanctioned by a world governing body such as FIFA, and it prevents him as well from standing again in the General Council. So any part of really football, this is should it really ends his football career and his governance career, which I think a lot of people would want to see happening in that as well. And he's also facing accusations of sexual assault in court in Spain, and this is in relation to the same event. So it's played on the sporting field as well as in the court of law.
Thank you, Felicity. That's our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. The armed offenders squad member who led the first team into Al Noor Mosque has described his frustration at the time it took to get paramedics to assist victims. The inquest into the 51 people murdered during the Christchurch terror attack has today heard from several police officers who have detailed the chaos and horror they confronted on March 15th, 2019. Timothy Brown was in court.
The terrorist shooting spree at Al Noor Mosque lasted only minutes, but left devastation in its wake. The first armed offenders squad team was at the mosque less than 10 minutes afterwards, and still unaware if an active shooter was in the building they were approaching. The officer who led that team in says nothing could have prepared him for what they found.
The bodies were piled up, maybe a metre into the corner, obviously where they were trying to escape or get away from things. There were bodies out on the floor. Most of them weren't moving. I do remember one male. He was sitting calling out. I think he'd been shot in the stomach or something. He kept calling out through that, saying, "Help me, help me."
The officer, who has name suppression, says he estimated there were 40 to 50 victims in the mosque. He says his team offered what little first aid they could, but once it was clear there was no active threat, he called for paramedics to come forward to the mosque. That occurred at 1:59 p.m. He repeated the call 2 minutes later.
Fair to say I was quite overwhelmed with the amount of injured and dying and deceased, and I suppose it became a bit of a focus getting them forward for me at that stage, and yes, you get a bit of frustration that it's not happening.
He expressed his frustration to another officer at 2:05 p.m. However, he told the inquest he understood the concern of staff due to how little was known about the situation at the time, including whether there were other offenders, their whereabouts and the potential for explosives. Soon after, the officer was tasked with going to the second scene at Linwood Islamic Centre, but turned back when, in a moment of confusion, Detective Superintendent Daryl Sweeney began describing the terrorist live stream over the police radio, unaware he wasn't watching it live.
When we turned back into Deans Ave, police down the street were hiding behind their cars, so they obviously thought it was real. But as we got closer, there were police at the scene standing there, obviously looking around, because as you'd imagine, when something like that happens, your first thought is, I'm here, what is this? But if someone keeps continually talking on the radio, it's very hard to get on and say, stand down, this is false.
The officer described the transmissions as someone panicking on the radio. He says it took up the ability to communicate on that channel for a couple of minutes. Upon arriving back at Deans Avenue, he realised the report of another shooter was false and a waste of time. Sergeant Aaron Reid, who at the time was a constable in an acting sergeant's role, was one of the first police officers on the scene at Deans Avenue. He told the inquest in his 15 or so years of policing, by March the 15th, 2019, he had only had a single day's training in an active shooter scenario. Mr Reid says at the beginning, no one was in charge of triaging the victims.
There was bodies lying on the ground. Some we got to, some we didn't. We went round. There was initially, nobody really was in charge. We just did what we did.
Mr Reid says he upset some worshippers by trying to move them to safety. It was one of the hardest things he's ever had to do, considering they had lost loved ones or had injured family members. When asked if specialist resources could have helped police and victims communicate on the day, Mr Reid says he didn't know.
I don't think New Zealand had ever planned for this to happen. I don't think that we could answer that. That's a what if, and I don't think at that point in time we were ready for this. So I can't answer that question.
Deputy Chief Coroner Bridget Winley asked him if there was anything that could have been done differently.
Every day, ma'am, I think about this dog, and I don't know.
The inquest continues tomorrow.
It is 25 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me live in the studio. Let's start with business confidence, Nona. It's bounced back, but there are inflation concerns that it is going to persist. What is the latest?
Yeah, so for the most part, business confidence has improved substantially. It was up 21 points, and it increased more towards the end of October after the election, and when it became obvious that the All Blacks were going to be in the final. So that was exciting. I don't know what's going to happen next. We'll see what happens with that. But in any case, inflation expectations were still above that 4% mark, 4.5% kind of percent. But for agriculture, it was over about 5.5%. The agricultural sector is huge and accounts for a lot of the economy. If their inflation expectations are that high, that's a concern for the Reserve Bank for sure, because 5.5% is a long way from 2%.
Okay, let's move on to NZX stock market. It's a bear market, so what, that 20% drop or more?
Yes, yeah. So we've been looking at the market for a while. I spoke with SALT Funds Management. They put out a report on global equity markets, but there was a whole section there on New Zealand. And one of the things they said was that normally we would do pretty well because we're heavily weighted with what we call defensive stocks like telecommunications and as well the electricity sector, which really has performed okay. But overall, we're lagging behind the rest of the world. And one of the reasons why is we don't have any exposure to what they call the Wonderful Seven. These are the big companies that are taking advantage of artificial intelligence. That's really got a buzz going in the market. People are excited about that. So that's helped lift Wall Street. We haven't seen that. If that wasn't there, then Wall Street would be basically flat. So we're not doing that badly, but we're not doing great. We're down more than 20% off our peak in early January 2021.
Okay, let's do the market numbers then.
All right, so our top 50 index, I should just say before, is that one of the things that came out late today was a message from Fonterra saying that their chief financial officer, who's been in the job only since February, has resigned and is stepping down on Friday. So we don't know.
No further dates as to
I
why?
asked why. No, they said nothing more to add. Thank you very much. And that's all there is. So the NZX Top 50 Index, it ended up 16 points to 10,758. The dollar, 58.3 US cents, 91.8 Australian, 48 British pence. We're going to have a lot of big news tomorrow. The Reserve Bank's coming out with their financial stability report. We're also going to have labour market data. And later in the week, the U.S. Federal Reserve is going to give us an update on interest rates. So, big week ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's all there is from Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier with business news there. The Israeli military says a soldier has been freed from Hamas captivity during a ground operation in Gaza. Hamas has released a video of 3 other Israeli women being held hostage. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described it as cruel psychological propaganda. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen reports.
There's good news for one family at least. Private Ori Megadish was rescued by the Israeli army last night. She'd been held in Gaza since the 7th of October. For the rest of the hostage families, the agony of waiting goes on. In the centre of Tel Aviv, the families of the hostages have set up a vigil opposite the Ministry of Defence. These are the faces of many of those who are missing. There's a table set for a Jewish Sabbath dinner, empty places for those who are held in Gaza, and along with the concern, more of the anger at the actions of Hamas, which is powering Israel's response.
Annihilate Hamas, so it won't happen again and again and again. From Masada to the Holocaust, never again. You cannot butcher Jews mano a mano, joyfully, send messages to your parents. I killed 10 Israelis, I'm using the phone of one of them.
After the video was released by Hamas on social media, the Israeli government said it was hugging the families of the hostages. But some of those families blame the Prime Minister and his government for not listening to their warnings about border security. In the hostage video, so does Daniela Loni in the centre. She calls for a deal to free the hostages and to free Palestinians in Israeli jails. Prime Minister Netanyahu's response was a ringing call to support Israel in this war.
Victory over these enemies begins with moral clarity. It begins with knowing the difference between good and evil, between right and wrong.
The images of the 7th of October torment Israelis. The Prime Minister has not accepted any personal responsibility for the failure to protect the border. The body of Shani Luke, a German-Israeli tattoo artist, has been recovered by Israeli soldiers inside the Gaza Strip. Her family recognized her in a video of gunmen celebrating her capture, and they'd hoped she was a hostage. Life is on hold here in the Israeli towns close to Gaza. Most people have moved somewhere safer with no end in sight to this war. Hamas took hostages in the first place to gain leverage over Israel. When the Israelis launched their ground operation, when talks to release those hostages were still going on, they said they would not grant Hamas any kind of impunity for what they'd done. But now, by making this video, Hamas has hit back with a calculated act of psychological warfare directed at the Prime Minister. The Israeli military has released video of its tanks advancing into Gaza. Somewhere out there are the rest of the hostages. Israel has declared a clear objective to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. assuming its tanks and troops can do that, Israel has not spelt out what comes next. Israel continues to inflict pain and death on Palestinian civilians. Throughout all the wars in Gaza, Israel's assertions that it targets Hamas and not civilians have been dismissed here by Palestinians as lies. This war is no different. In the grounds of Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, another Palestinian couple mourn their dead children. Israel claims there is a Hamas bunker under the hospital. This looks as if it will be a long war, with cruelty heaped on cruelty.
And it is 17 minutes away from 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, do keep your feedback coming. Get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know your thoughts on Supie and our conversation with one of the former directors. He resigned just before their financial predicament went public. Also, dangerous dogs, what to do about them. 2101. On text, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines now. Ane a ana mena pita pita kōrero.
An armed Defender Squad member who responded to the March 15th, 2019 Christchurch shootings says he did not initially know how many attacks had happened, even once on the ground. The former officer today told the inquest for 51 worshippers that communications were confusing and he received limited information. The company managing Whakaari White Island could be fined up to $1.5 million after being convicted today of failing in its duty to make the site a safe workplace. Judge Evangelist Thomas says Whakaari management breached the Health and Safety at Work Act by not performing proper risk assessments before the eruption that killed 22 people and injured 25 nearly 4 years ago. The United States is confident there will be an increase in humanitarian aid entering Gaza through the Rafah crossing at the border with Egypt in the coming days. But while the White House says the US supports the idea of temporary humanitarian corridors, it says an actual ceasefire would only benefit Hamas. Wellington City Council will hear submissions tomorrow on whether to let dogs onto Oriental Bay's beach in summer during off-peak hours. Dogs are banned from the 1st of November until May, but the change could allow them to roam off the leash before 10 a.m. and after 7 p.m. The council will decide in February. And King Charles and Queen Camilla have arrived in Kenya for a state visit, their first to a Commonwealth country since he became monarch. The royal tour comes as the East African country celebrates 60 years of independence. And those are the headlines, Lisa.
Ngā mihi, Anna. More than 3,300 children have been killed in Gaza since the Hamas attacks on October 7, according to an aid agency, and a further 940 are missing, believed to be buried under the rubble of buildings destroyed in Israeli airstrikes. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees is relying on information from Gaza's health agency and media reports, but exact figures are impossible to verify. In its latest situation report, the agency paints an increasingly grim picture, including a growing death toll among its own staff in the Palestinian territory. Joining us now from the UNRWA in Gaza is Kiwi Hector Sharp. Kia ora, Hector.
Good morning, Lisa. Hi.
Can you tell us a bit about your staff? The death toll among people working for the UN there seems to be growing at a horrendous rate.
Yes, it's truly tragic how many colleagues I've lost. 63 at latest count. Our colleagues are UN officials, but they're also part of the community. You know, we have 13,000 staff here delivering a huge development and humanitarian program, and some of them have died while on duty. Others have died in their homes with their families. It's tragic.
Yet people are continuing to work for you, Hector?
Yes, I think that just shows the dedication that our staff have. I mean, this is their community, and the ability to help those around them is through their work. So yes, they're still turning up to work despite the security threats, not just from the bombing campaign, but for also civil unrest. And you know, people are very desperate at the moment. So our staff are under a heck of a lot of pressure.
How are you feeling about that, Hector? I mean, is there anywhere safe for you?
Safety is relative, but we're doing our best to fortify our positions and make sure that we have a safe base to operate from. I've been here for a few years now. I'm part of the aid community, but I'm also, intertwined with the beneficiaries, and I hope that they see what we're doing here. In terms of the threat from the bombing, it's part of my job to make sure that our locations, all UN locations, are known to both sides of the conflict to protect them. But as we've seen over the last 2 weeks, that hasn't always been possible. We've had 42 UN installations that have been hit, either directly or indirectly, by strikes, and those are schools, hospitals, distribution centres, warehouses, and our own headquarters, which I spent 4 days underground while we were under severe shelling. So, safety is relative.
And the number of children who are dying in this conflict is continuing to grow, now more than 3,300. What are you seeing in terms of the impact on children there?
Yes, this is one of the particularly horrible parts of this conflict is that Gaza has an incredibly young population. I believe over 60% of the population are children. So obviously when you're conducting a widespread conflict and aerial bombing campaign, that's gonna come out in the numbers, which is tragic. From what I've seen, I have visited Supie Hospital, which is the main hospital here. I have walked the wards. I have seen the children, and it is heartbreaking. Those scenes, I can't describe them.
So today we're hearing from the US government that it's confident that more aid is going to be able to come into Gaza. Do you share that confidence?
It doesn't matter whether I share it or not. This conflict will not be solved by a trickle of trucks of aid. A ceasefire is needed so we can safely distribute any aid that we receive. A ceasefire is needed so that we can restore civil order, so that people don't loot that aid that's coming in. This will not be solved by a trickle of trucks. We've received 117 in the last week. We need at least 100 on the regular, on the daily. But the UN itself, we are tasked with once that aid arrives at the border, it is our staff and our organisation that is tasked with just distributing, storing, and keeping that aid safe. And the more that we are in this conflict, the more that our ability to do that is degraded.
Hector, tell me about the breakdown of, I suppose it's the breakdown of civil society there. I mean, we've seen pictures of people looting your storerooms.
Yes. For 3 weeks now, this population of 2.3 million people has effectively been pushed into starvation. And UNRWA is one of the few places which has remaining stocks, and we're doing our best to ration them so that they go to the most vulnerable and to the places they need. But the breakdown of civil order, as we saw 2 days ago, came on the back of over 24 hours of communications blackout, which caused widespread panic. It came on the back of ground invasion that is now ongoing, which has obviously essentially cut the Gaza Strip in two between north and south. So I think that the civil unrest is a sign of how far this population has been pushed, it's worrying to note that we cannot control our own stores. I mean, the UN doesn't have guns. The UN doesn't have a police force. Our warehouse that was overrun by 7,000 people. It'd be impossible to suggest that the UN could stop people from doing that. So what we really need now is a chance to get back up on our feet, a chance to distribute aid so that people know that food is coming to them, so that they don't have to resort to looting. Thanks.
Thank you for your time, Hector. Kia ora rā e ho. That is Hector Sharp, who is a New Zealander working in Gaza for the UN there, assisting Palestinian refugees. It is 10 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. There are growing concerns for the Hauraki Gulf's penguins, with 10 chicks found starving and dozens dead on Waiheke Island in the past few weeks. It has conservationists worried that we could be seeing a repeat of the mass die-off of korora in the summer of 2017-2018. The deaths are thought to be due to overfishing and rising sea temperatures, which drive the fish the birds feed on into deeper water where they can't catch them. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Tim Collins have the story.
Hey buddy, come here.
Just a few weeks old, these two little chicks were found emaciated and starving on Whakaari Island. Members of the public took them to the native bird rescue, where they're now receiving critical care, along with 5 other korora.
So there was a couple of young kids named these two, which is how we got Waddles and Araha.
Native Bird Rescue founder Karen Saunders is worried this could be the start of another mass die-off as occurred 5 years ago.
What it is like taking us back to is in 2017-18 season, as it started like this. All the chicks were dying, they were all coming out of their nests, and that year we had thousands and thousands of korora from Waihi up the northeastern coastline of New Zealand. We would have people calling with like 10 or 20 dead on the beach each day, so our community got really distressed.
That was thought to be a 1 in 10 or even 20-year event, but it now seems this may become the new normal. Karen says overfishing in the Hauraki Gulf is a huge factor.
I mean, on a normal weekend here, we'll have 5,000 recreational boats in the Hauraki Gulf, recreational fishers, fishing. And then you've also got bottom trawling is still happening in the Hauraki Gulf. And then you've got the commercial fishing as well. So it's a really massive take.
Climate change is also at play, with warmer sea temperatures driving fish into deeper water, much further for penguins to dive for their food. Around 150 penguins have been admitted to Native Bird Rescue over the 7 years the charity has been operating. On Monday, baby Gus was found by Zoe and her partner on Palm Beach.
We were just sort of minding our own business, and my partner all of a sudden leapt up and ran towards the breakers and scooped something up, which I thought was a piece of driftwood, which turned out to be a little baby penguin. So yeah, he just scooped him up just before he got sort of dumped hard by a wave.
Only 2 weeks old, Gus weighed just a third of what a chick his age should. He was severely dehydrated and also hypothermic because his down feathers aren't waterproof yet. Zoe says it's been a huge wake-up call.
We've all been told that it's, the Hauraki needs a rest, and it's just really obvious when you're getting sea life washing up, starving.
Now Gus is receiving intensive care along with the other penguins. Pebbles, Lucky, Pengi, Bob, Aroha and Waddles at Native Bird Rescue. Sadly, another had to be euthanised as it was bitten by a dog. Karen says rehabilitation starts with hydrating the penguins and then feeding them something similar to what they'd get from their mothers, fish smoothies.
At the stage they're at now, we have to make 2 1.5 litre anchovy smoothies a day, and you have to put that through a very fine sieve, so it takes probably over an hour to make each one. And then we have to feed them 5 times a day with a 3-hour gap in between each feed.
They guzzle down the smoothie through a syringe with a tube that goes down to their stomach. While it's an arduous task, the team of volunteers is always gratified to see the penguins become healthy again. Once the penguins have enough strength, they move from critical care to a rehabilitation habitat, where they do physiotherapy and swimming to prepare them for life in the wild. It's hoped this lot can be released around March, when there'll be enough anchovies to eat. Karen admits it can be hard saying goodbye.
We never want to imprint on them or form, too deep a bond, but to do the work we do, we have to have, like a deep kindness inside you and a deep caring, so you do get attached to them.
If things in the Hauraki Gulf carry on as they are, Karen says korora face an uncertain future.
We might have an extinction of korora. Yeah, there's been a few numbers thrown around by a few experts, but it's not looking too good.
If members of the public find a korora on the beach that looks abandoned, the advice is to contact Native Bird Rescue or the Department of Conservation.
From tomorrow, dogs are banned from Oriental Bay and Wellington, but an effort is underway to allow poochers to roam the sandy shore during summer months. Traditionally, dogs can go on the beach in winter, but not summer. The City Council will listen to submissions tomorrow as part of its animal bylaw review, which was last done in 2016. Ashley McCall reports.
This is Teddy getting his paws wet and having fun along Oriental Bay for the last time this year. It's off limits to poochers like Teddy from tomorrow until May, but that could soon change as the council has proposed allowing doggies off their leash in off-peak hours during summer before 10 a.m. and after 7 p.m. Dog owners are all for it.
That's before it gets hot and usually before there's a lot of people down here.
They're part of the family, and when we come to the beach we like to bring them with us.
If you have a limit in the day, that means that everyone knows when the dogs are there and when they're not.
There's not many kids here before 10 in the morning. The dogs just love it out here on the beach.
They all agree that if these changes are implemented, all dog owners should be held accountable for their pooches, but not everyone is having a bone of it.
I deliberately come down here early as I can to avoid as many dogs as I can because they pee on my clothes and they pee on my blankets and pee on the beach.
Dog owners don't pick up after their dogs, and it all washes in the sea where we swim, and that's our recreational area.
I'm a bit afraid personally of dogs.
Since the last review of the dog policy in 2016, the number of dog registrations has grown in the capital by 39%, up to 16,000 doggos. The proposed changes come after a council survey where 88% of those polled wanted to see more focus on making the city canine-friendly. Pukahino Lambton Ward Councillor Nicola Young isn't barking mad about having dogs on Oriental Bay, despite being a hound owner herself.
In the summer, we need to remember that our human beings and children are more important than dogs. The council does not have the manpower to monitor. You'd have to be there all the time. You'd have to have several people on the beach monitoring. It's not just biting children, it's also the fact that they're defecating on the beach, and that to me is a bigger risk.
The council is also proposing to expand off-leash areas across 10 suburbs in Wellington. Councillor Young wants Mount Victoria included in this.
What we should do is have nearly all of Mount Victoria off the leash. It's well away. It's on the other side of the city to where they're rewilding kiwi, and it's near a very intensively populated part of the city.
The council will be hearing submissions tomorrow on the changes and will make a decision in February next year.
Alrighty, let's get to some of your feedback now, starting with Supie. This is the online grocer that is gone out of business, voluntary administration at the moment. This listener says Supie was never going to survive from day one. They needed directors with deep industry experience and many hundreds of millions of dollars at least to compete. They had neither, says this person. If the warehouse could not do this, what did they expect? That's from Stephen, who's emailed us. Someone else is raising questions about labour laws. This is in relation to the 120 workers who are not likely to get paid. Well, very unlikely, actually. This person says, why no pay? Where's directors' liabilities to those families? New Zealand company law is inhumane, this person says. Another is questioning, is Ben, this is the former director, is he going to be out of pocket too? It is tragic for the employees affected. This person says the scenario is no different than hundreds of other businesses that have gone into liquidation in recent years. If there is no money to operate the business, then unfortunately some people will lose out. On the subject of dangerous dogs, we have talked and talked about this for donkey's years, this listener says, and still no action. The authorities do not have the backbone to make change. Not even savaged humans is enough. You have to start somewhere, ban known bad breeds and tighten the noose.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The company managing Whakaari White Island has been convicted of failing in its duty to make the island a safe workplace. In the Auckland District Court today, Judge Evangelos Thomas ruled that Whakaari management breached the Health and Safety at Work Act by not performing proper risk assessments before the fatal eruption 4 years ago. He says the company should have engaged with experts to mitigate the risks of an active volcano.
It was fundamental that it engaged the necessary expertise to assess risk. This was critical to ensuring that tours could be conducted safely. Its failure to do so then and at any time since was always within its control.
22 people were killed and 25 injured by the eruption. An armed defenders squad member who responded to the Christchurch terror attacks says he did not initially know how many attacks had happened, even once on the ground. The former officer today told the inquest into the deaths of 51 worshippers that communications were confusing and he got limited information. He says they were told the Linwood Islamic Centre was the top priority, but upon arrival were sent to the Al Noor Mosque before they'd even got out of the car.
The information on the radio channel was confusing. There had been quite obviously an attack at Deans Avenue. That was all I knew of.
The former officer says they were not told Al Noor had already been cleared or that delayed video footage taken by the terrorist had influenced some of the radio communications. An emergency meeting of the UN Security Council has heard that the situation in Gaza is becoming increasingly desperate as Israel continues its bombardment of the territory. The head of the UN's humanitarian agency, OCHA, Lisa Doughton, described a situation faced by many.
The scale of the horror people are experiencing in Gaza is really hard to convey. People are becoming increasingly desperate as they search for food, water, and shelter amid the relentless bombing campaign that's wiping out whole families and entire neighborhoods.
Citing the Palestinian Health Ministry, UNICEF says more than 420 children are being killed or injured in Gaza every day. Meanwhile, the US has dismissed as absurd claims by Russia that an anti-Israel riot at a Dagestan airport on Sunday was organised by Ukraine and the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said the incident was part of an attempt to spread chaos in Russia. Hundreds stormed the airport ahead of the arrival of a flight from Israeli capital Tel Aviv. Many waved Palestinian flags and chanted anti-Semitic slogans. Dagestan, a constituent republic of Russia, has a majority Muslim population, and the incident is thought to have been sparked by anger over the conflict in Gaza. Security forces eventually brought the situation under control. A former director of failed online grocer Supie, who resigned just days before it went under, says the company acted as soon as it knew it was in trouble. Supie went into liquidation yesterday, owing $3 million, putting 120 people out of work. Ben Keep told Checkpoint that details of what happened will come out in the administration process, but the failure is tragic.
Lots of people have lost money. Some people have lost their jobs. Some people, maybe put orders in and aren't going to get their stuff. No one is happy about this. No one has profited from this. And so I have no end of sympathy for those people.
Ben Keep says the failure is partly due to the broken supermarket sector and the difficulties faced by start-up companies. The general manager of the night and day chain of convenience stores says not enough has been done to create competition in the sector. Matthew Lane says new businesses can't be competitive against large entrenched chains. The Warehouse Group's chief executive Nick Grayston says Supie's failure is a stark reminder of how challenging it is to change the market in New Zealand. Car dealers say they're slashing the prices on electric vehicles ahead of the clean car discount ending, but buyers are not rushing through the doors. National has promised to scrap the clean car discount and so-called ute tax in its first 100 days in government. However, despite coalition talks being underway, Oliver Gasley from Wellington's Gasley Motors says EV sales remain flat.
I just think that we're just waiting for a bit of a change in government to be finalised, and you've still got quite strong headwinds with interest rates being high and inflation still being high. There's a lot of uncertainty, so people aren't just throwing money out willy-nilly.
Oliver Gasley says many dealerships would have expected increased EV sales with the imminent change of government. And you can hear more about this a little later during the night. Actually, it'll be on Checkpoint shortly. And the remaining cast of Friends have given their first public reaction to the sudden death of their co-star Matthew Perry, who was reportedly found unresponsive in a hot tub at his Los Angeles home on Sunday. Here's the BBC's David Willis.
In a joint statement, Matthew Perry's 5 co-stars Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, Lisa Kudrow, Matt LeBlanc and David Schwimmer called his death at the age of 54 an unfathomable loss. "We were more than just castmates," it reads. "We are a family," adding, "There is so much to say, but right now we're going to take a moment to grieve. Our thoughts and our love are with Matty's family, friends and everyone who loved him around the world." Friends was one of the most watched shows in television history.
And that's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, the new Children's Commissioner on her priorities for the role. How a Timaru company is tackling how to upcycle or recycle safety wear clothing. Author and journalist Glenn Humphreys on a history of rugby league through artefacts and oddities. And Jade Kake on her novel Checkerboard Hill, a story of belonging, misunderstanding and fractured relationships as a young Māori woman living in Australia. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and the Central High Country. Rain or showers, possibly heavy, clearing from Northland, Auckland and areas near the west coast tomorrow. However, thunderstorms are possible, downpours elsewhere tomorrow afternoon and evening. The remainder of the North Island, partly cloudy, isolated showers in the afternoons and evenings, possibly thundery about northern Whanganui and Manawatu, also tomorrow about Wairarapa. Nelson, Marlborough and Bulla mainly fine, however isolated afternoon or evening showers inland with thunderstorms possible. Low cloud or fog about the Kaikoura coast. Canterbury, Otago and Southland fine apart from fog and low cloud near the coast, and isolated evening showers for inland Canterbury with thunderstorms possible. Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, however patchy light rain about Fiordland tomorrow, spreading to Westland at night. And for the Chatham Islands, rain developing this evening. RNZ National, it is coming up to 8 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi Anna, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. With the ceasefire in Gaza becoming more and more unlikely, aid agencies are continuing to express grave concern over the humanitarian crisis. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says a ceasefire would amount to a surrender to Hamas, and it is a time for war. UNICEF's chief has warned of a possible catastrophe due to a lack of clean water. The WHO says hundreds have been killed in attacks on the health sector, and the UN is warning civil order is deteriorating, with people breaking into warehouses to take survival essentials. Palestinian Red Cross has this morning reported that heavy artillery and airstrikes have hit near Al-Quds Hospital, and those sheltering inside the hospital are experiencing fear and panic. Joining us now from Sydney is Aaron Jagan, the humanitarian lead for Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières. Thank you for joining us this evening. Is MSF able to keep going in Gaza under these conditions?
Hi, Lisa. Yes, the situation in Gaza right now, it's catastrophic and horrifying, doesn't even begin to describe it. The relentless bombing by the Israeli forces intensified so much. Our doctors are trying their best to continue working as best they can. We have sent supplies in there. But the situation right now, the hospitals are not only overwhelmed, but they're running out of supplies. So it's imperative that we can continue keeping to work there. But there needs to be in a much, it's very unsafe for our facilities right now there.
You say supplies are getting in. Are you getting everything you need in the volume you need?
Not at all. Since October 20th, I think less than 100 trucks have gone in. And if you compare that to prior to October 7th, nearly 200 to 300 trucks were going in daily to sustain the population of Gaza. So you can see that this aid that's gone in is minuscule. We've managed to get a little bit in, but we've still got tons and tons waiting to go through.
I'm sorry to be so brutal, Aaron, but does that mean that your doctors are having to make decisions where they only have enough to treat certain people?
You're absolutely right. I can share some pretty harrowing stories. Our doctors who are working in various hospitals in the Gaza Strip, they've reported that they're seeing 800 to 1,000 patients a day per hospital. All of these are requiring emergency assistance. Many of them are children and women. So we're talking about extremely harrowing presentations. I mean, you've heard that the death toll is now over 8,000 people, and more than 3,000 have been children. But we're seeing crushed limbs, burns, shrapnel wounds, serious trauma, and many patients can't receive treatment because of the lack of supplies and spaces. Our doctor recently described that many patients are amputating limbs without anesthetic or painkillers, and that's just as bad as it gets, really, from a medical point of view. And it's just a spotlight on why we really need an immediate ceasefire to prevent more deaths and to stop this real indiscriminate bloodshed and the massive attack that's happening on Gaza right now.
Some people working in the aid sector believe that it is on the verge of collapse in Gaza, your ability to help people and to carry on.
It's as accurate as you get in terms of the pressure that people are under right now. It's where hospitals are running out of supplies. We're flooded with patients. There was a total communications blackout on the 27th of October. We've lost contact with many of our doctors. We're trying to keep in touch with them so that we can see what they need and try and get supplies through. But this is exactly it's the sentiments that you've just shared now, and what I've just shared is exactly why we needed a ceasefire and why there needs to be a lifting of the siege to allow increased and continuous humanitarian supplies into Gaza, essential items including food, water, as well as fuel, and ensuring some kind of a safe passage to reach the people with the greatest needs.
Israel seems to be firm on this, though, Aaron, that very firm on it. The Prime Minister saying it is a time for war, and that to have a ceasefire, well, that's tantamount to surrendering to Hamas.
And I think the politics of this are going to be the politics, and of course we're horrified and shocked at the killings that have happened on both sides of this. But the impact of delaying for a ceasefire means that there'll be a continuous amount of lives that will be lost, and we're already seeing what really does amount to collective punishment of the Gaza Strip. The siege that's been imposed, the withholding of food, water, fuel, and electricity, it's unconscionable. And the complete siege of Gaza is not only a violation of international humanitarian law, but it's a crisis of humanity. So I'd really like to draw back down to at what cost? And the cost is absolutely at the expense of the people.
Israel has also alleged that Hamas is using places like hospitals and clinics to shelter, and that they have a sophisticated network of tunnels under those facilities. Would you like to speak to that allegation?
I think it's important for us to talk about healthcare facilities and medical structures in conflict. These are protected spaces. These are spaces where civilians should be able to go receive treatment. And even in this conflict, there have been thousands of people that are seeking shelter there because the usual places such as schools, camps, are all being targeted by airstrikes. They're being hit. Now, as of 23 October, according to the WHO, 72 healthcare facilities have been attacked in Gaza. What you've just spoken to and what I'm speaking to right now shows you that there are just no safe spaces in Gaza right now, which is exactly why there needs to be a ceasefire. The way in which war is conducted matters, and I think that responsibility is squarely upon the international community, and I think the actions of the world leaders are too weak, too slow. We've seen this non-binding UN resolution for humanitarian truce. It's done nothing to rein in this indiscriminate violence. So I think we need to go back to the fundamental principles of medical structures being protected and very important for civilians who are trying to live under pretty brutal circumstances in Gaza right now.
Thank you for your time, Aaron. That's Aaron Jagan, and he is from Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, speaking there from Sydney. It is 14 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Dealers say they're slashing the prices on electric vehicles ahead of the end of the clean car discount, but even that doesn't seem to have buyers rushing through the doors. National has promised to scrap the clean car discount and so-called ute tax, and as it hammers out coalition agreements behind closed doors, EV dealers say the market is mostly flat. Crystal Gibbons reports.
The Clean Car Rebate, which provides significant discounts on low-emission vehicles, is expected to be axed by the end of the year, under a new national-led government. Brendan Foot supersite dealer David Foot says people have taken advantage of the government rebate, and that's encouraged dealers to bring the cars in.
So we're finding some of the manufacturers, because they do have a lot of stock on the ground in New Zealand at the moment, it seems. So a lot of them are trying to clear the stock before the end of the Clean Car scheme. So there's some very good deals out there for consumers.
And manufacturers are also making an effort to draw customers in.
So, for example, GWM, one of the brands we have, they have an Aura, which they've just reduced the price of that car by $5,000. After the government rebate, that car comes in the late 30s. So we're actually seeing quite a different dynamic in the market, where some of these EVs are actually almost at price parity with similar type ICE cars.
Gaisley Motor Group dealer Oliver Gaisley agrees most distributors are slashing prices to become more competitive. Gaisley have a number of cars listed with prices reduced between $2,000 and $5,000 even before the Clean Car discount. But Mr Gaisley says the market is tough.
You know, we've got most distributors now selling electric cars. Everyone's got electric hybrid cars inside their fleets. I just think that we're just waiting for a bit of a change in government to be finalised. And, you know, you've still got quite strong headwinds with interest rates being high and inflation still being high. There's a lot of uncertainty. So people aren't just throwing money out willy-nilly.
It's too soon for official figures on those EV sales to be released, but the industry says there have been moves to clear stock ahead of the discount ending. And in the used car market, Drive EV director Steve Greenwood says that while the election has put EVs on people's radar, there hasn't been a stampede in the door.
I think it's probably more just people who are going to buy an EV, maybe being moved forward a few months in the process, because there's, I guess, an incentive to do something now.
However, Mr Greenwood believes the EV industry will continue to grow, rebate or not. National is also promising it will stop penalising high-emission vehicles. Most dealerships reported sales of those vehicles have been slow for the last few months, but they expect to see an increase in the new year.
Tesla is under the microscope over allegations it may have over-revved claims about its famous car's capabilities. The company's revealed it's been subpoenaed by the Department of Justice for more information, including the range of its cars. In its quarterly statement to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Tesla warns if the government decides to pursue enforcement action, there's the possibility of a material adverse impact on business, financial position or brand, though it says to its knowledge no government agency has concluded that any wrongdoings occurred. But Jacob Frenkel, who is a former SEC enforcement attorney and ex-federal prosecutor, says it's serious when the Department of Justice comes calling with a subpoena.
What we learned in October, meaning basically a week ago, is that what had previously been, or what seems to have been, voluntary requests for information, the Department of Justice escalated that to issuing subpoenas. So clearly the Department of Justice not only is viewing the investigation, or at least the level of cooperation, as requiring compulsory process. That actually was on the heels, that disclosure was on the heels pretty much two to 3 weeks earlier of the SEC bringing an actual case against Elon Musk to compel him to give investigative testimony.
So, in terms of expanding the scope of the investigation, the information it is requesting is related to matters associated with personal benefits, related parties, and vehicle range. What is that? What are they asking for?
Well, what that really highlights is the fact that the investigation involves both Mr. Musk personally and the company itself. The company's disclosures about full self-driving, vehicle range, those are corporate disclosure issues. Those really are issues for the company. When we're talking about such issues as personal benefits, related party transactions, that's going much more to Mr. Musk himself. And questions about the disclosures that the company has made and that he was responsible for ensuring would be made accurately.
So, in terms of the vehicle range, Jacob, what are they probing there, do we think?
Well, I really the probe, as best as I can appreciate it, because the company really has not gone into a lot of detail, nor is it really obligated to go into a lot of detail. It relates to what the company has disclosed about the vehicle capabilities. And, and to the extent that, you're talking about a public company in the United States, regardless of profile, making disclosures about the capabilities of its technology and holding itself out to be an innovator and leader in technology. These are investigations that go to the core of the disclosures about, can the technology do what the company is representing that it actually does? And if the result of the investigation is that company officials knew when they made the disclosures that the disclosures were not accurate, the likelihood is the company will face civil liability, at least with the SEC. But there's the potential, as we saw with companies such as Volkswagen and others, that there could be criminal culpability for various individuals.
Observing this from afar, a lot of people are scratching their heads, thinking this is a lot of resource from the Department of Justice. Why are they so interested in a company like Tesla, Jacob?
I don't view this as a focus on Tesla or picking on Tesla, much as Elon Musk would like to create that perception. The fact is, you have a company that you have a CEO who has made disclosures over a series of years. I mean, in 2018, the SEC brought a case against, Mr. Musk in connection with when he was talking about taking Tesla private and possibly being able to do it at $420 a share. And the question was, was that misleading? Was that intended to be manipulative? I mean, that was an allegation of fraud, and ultimately that case was settled with a $40 million payment. I mean, you almost have a CEO who keeps inviting investigation upon investigation.
So, Jacob, in summary, don't talk big if you cannot deliver.
That is fair. That's a fair summary. Don't talk big if you can't deliver. But at the same time, it's almost more, don't exaggerate that big talk to an extent that what you're doing is you're communicating in a way that is inducing investors to act. And that's where U.S. regulators and law enforcement really tend to get bent out of shape and pursue investigations.
That's Government Investigations Attorney Jacob Frenkel speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there will be no ceasefire as he urges the international community to back the country's war against Hamas. Overnight, Gaza was effectively cut in two for a period as Israel's military moved deeper into the Strip. Gaza's health ministry says 8,300 people have been killed in Israel's assault, launched in response to the killing by Hamas of 1,400 people and the taking of more than 200 hostages 3 weeks ago. The conflict is taking a heavy toll on the young, with the organisation Save the Children saying thousands are being killed. The ABC's Nicole Johnston has the story and a warning there are some distressing descriptions in this story.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to press on with the war, saying it's the only way to get more than 200 hostages freed.
Our common assessment of not only the cabinet members but also all the security forces and the military is that the ground action actually creates the possibility, not the certainty, but the possibility of getting our hostages out, because Hamas will not do it unless they're under pressure. They simply will not do it. They only do it under pressure. This creates pressure.
Overnight, Hamas freed an Israeli soldier it had taken hostage during the October 7 attack. In total, 5 have been released. And the militant group also published a video of 3 women held captive in Gaza. Israel labelled it cruel propaganda. Ofer Mazga is an Israeli citizen whose grandparents were taken by Hamas. She says Israel is responsible for its own citizens, not the people of Gaza.
At the end, you first think about your own and the people all around the world. I just want to ask them, what would you do? What would you do if people will come inside your house, will take your family, will rape your wife or your daughter, and will burn your kid? What would you do?
Meanwhile, in Gaza, the number of children reported killed is staggering. Palestinian health officials say more than 3,400 have died. The charity, Save the Children, says more have been killed in Gaza already than the total number of children killed across the world's conflict zones in the last 4 years. Jason Lee is the organisation's country director for the occupied Palestinian territories.
Parents are writing the names on the children's legs, but also writing the names of their kids on theirs, just to try and help identify, find kids if they're killed. This is the tragedy of it all, that parents and children have been forced to do this. I mean, I cannot imagine what it's like for a child right now to think that, is this the last time that you will see your mum and dad? When will you be separated from your brother or sister, and not knowing if you will see tomorrow?
Are there many reports of children who've lost their entire families and are now effectively orphans?
Entire families have been wiped out. There are many kids now in the shelters that do not have a parent with them. They've been separated from their parents or they've lost their parents. The sexual and gender-based violence against young boys and young girls is on the rise. We have reports of this happening. There are 1,000 children that are still buried under the rubble.
Save the Children says people are eating only once a day. Taxi driver Abid Mohsen fled from North Gaza to the south and told me he can no longer provide for his family.
From 2 weeks, we haven't any food. We haven't any water, clean water to drink. We haven't money. Everything here is stopped. There is no flour. My children are going to the markets to have some biscuits, some Pepsi, anything to have.
The Israeli military is moving deeper into Gaza. Overnight, it cut, for a number of hours, the main highway running from the north to the south, the Salah ad-Din Road. I was sent this voice note from Gaza journalist Sami Ziara, explaining what was happening at the time.
The Israeli tank, it's over there, and bulldozer. Also, they shelled 2 cars, which they didn't see the tank over there. 3 people were killed and many injured.
45 aid trucks entered today through Egypt's Rafah crossing. Before the war, there were hundreds every day. It's an impossible plight, rationing food and water to people wearied by war and hunger. Who gets food and who doesn't? That is life in Gaza now.
It is 27 minutes after 6. Let's take a change in direction and leave you with something a little lighter. It is Halloween, and one of the traditions recognised around the world is carving pumpkins to make lanterns. But what do you do with the rest of the pumpkin? Well, after Halloween, many will be left to rot on the doorstep or just be thrown away. The BBC's Harry Bly has been finding out how to get the most out of your Halloween pumpkin.
The word pumpkin comes from the ancient Greek word pepon, meaning large melon. They're the most famous variety of the common squash, with a hard orange or yellow skin and a soft, slightly sweet flesh inside. Around the world, these rotund squashes are turned into lanterns for Halloween, known in some countries as jack-o'-lanterns, a tradition brought to the United States by Irish immigrants, originating in ancient Celtic folklore. Pumpkins are a good source of fibre and contain a range of vitamins and minerals. But in the spirit of reducing food waste, can we eat leftover lanterns? Felicity Cloak is a food writer for The Guardian newspaper and isn't convinced.
It's not necessarily perfect for eating. The varieties that we see in supermarkets and farm shops that are intended for jack-o'-lanterns are bred to look good. You know, they're basically like the Hollywood ideal of a pumpkin. They're very watery and a bit stringy.
Not all hope is lost, however. Pumpkins can be used in a variety of recipes. Felicity recommends roasting to get the most flavour.
But what you need to do is get as much moisture out as possible. So if you roast it and then maybe drain it, or sort of basically you need to really concentrate that flavour. You need to give it a helping hand in the kitchen.
There are a number of recipes online for pumpkin soup, which involves adding herbs and spices to chunks of the pumpkin flesh and roasting in the oven. Another method is to grate the pumpkin raw and make sweet pumpkin bread. And then there's pumpkin pickle, using finely chopped pumpkin flesh. Perfect for the festive season.
Right, we've got to get our skates on, but tune in at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning when First Up talks to Black Caps all-rounder Jimmy Neesham. Oh, Jimmy Neesham, he's in India at the Cricket World Cup.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Todd Zahner. A former director of online grocer Supie is blaming its failure on some management decisions as well as outside factors. Ben Kepe says details of what happened will come out in the administration process. A court's ruled the company managing Whakaari White Island breached the Health and Safety at Work Act by not performing proper risk assessments before the 2019 eruption that killed 22 people. Whakaari management will be sentenced in February. Israel says it's extending ground operations into Gaza to destroy Hamas. The Palestinian Red Crescent says the area around the Al-Quds hospital in Gaza City has been under heavy bombing. And the remaining cast of Friends have called the death of co-star Matthew Perry at the weekend an unfathomable loss. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
RNZ Music presents Marauders, Handicam Time Machine, featuring Fat Freddy's Drop debut European tour in 2003. Go back in time with Aotearoa's most beloved and successful bands as they land in London to work towards their dream of an international career. Watch the first season this week at rnz.co.nz/Marauders.